I was watching a movie, Sister Midnight, yesterday. It's a fantastic film, Indian film that played Cannes last year. And the music stuck out to me because it was this really like, kind of like almost like this rock, Western rock sensibility. And then I looked up who it was. It's the lead singer of Interpol, Paul Banks. And that's quite an interesting pairing. There's this big trend in film and film music specifically where a lot of artists from the indie music world are like being plucked by filmmakers to make their music. That's coming from these different spheres, not very sort of conventional
Right.
places of film composition.
And when you said that, you made me think of this is probably the example that everyone goes to, but Trent Reznor obviously was like, I feel like one of the first, at least one of the first that people who were not really steeped in the industry were sort of aware of. And I was thinking of Challengers, which, great movie, kind of universally acclaimed, but I remember watching that. Have you seen Challengers?
I have. I love it. It was
Yeah.
really good.
So I remember watching it and thinking like, this feels like, so first of all, also it seemed sort of unexpected. The music was sort of kind of like heavy electronic and rhythmic, and it was sort of like sexy, but also someone on Saturday Night Live described it as like sexy, but also anxious. But I remember like watching it and thinking, it's like, I could see this being a totally different movie, the exact same movie without this score.
That's a cool part that's happening in film music right now where, directors are, basically pairing with a lot of their favorite musicians that don't really come from the film music world, but they just have interesting bands. And I think it does do exactly what you're saying. It creates this unique feeling, especially like with Challengers. It's this sort of pulsating electronic music that doesn't feel like you would naturally think that would be the score of that film, but it works perfectly because it's so atypical too.
So when it's something like that, where I could imagine that like the scoring is part of the process or a little earlier in the filmmaking, maybe. Um, do you think it changes like the way that you approach directing, like setting up a scene? If you have an idea, maybe this is a little bit different for you because you are a composer, but if you have an idea, you have a soundtrack in your head, or you have an idea of the sound in your head.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I feel like, there's film music and then there's music. Film music often tries to sort of, it feels like its own genre. And I think that can sometimes be very limiting for like film itself. But a lot of these interesting directors are poking out of that. And with Sister Midnight, specifically, it was really interesting because it's a film that's set in rural India about arranged marriage, and then it kind of goes into this sort of supernatural aspect. And I think it's a fantastic film. But what makes it really, really unique is also the music pairing of this rock like soundtrack that doesn't even feel like it would normally ever be in a movie, let alone a
Right.
arranged marriage film in India.
I remember I was also thinking an early version of what became Yasmin's Element. There was a scene that maybe I just worked on. I don't even know if I shared it, but I had this whole sequence in my head of when the school is being sort of picked up and carried literally on the students' back from Pakistan back to Afghanistan. And I kept hearing music of some like very kind of like almost cliche patriotic like Leonard Skinner, just as being sort of irreverent and heretical and kind of like almost its own commentary, something that is like so different from what you expect, but has this like only almost kind of like makes you smile and like, what are they doing? But like, oh, I kind of get it.
Okay, so that makes me think of this new music festival that Trent Reznor is putting on. It's called Future Ruins. And
Hmm.
basically, it's this first of its kind where it's basically a lot of film composers that are putting on live concerts. So the worlds are colliding where composers are becoming their own sort of artists and bands. And then bands are also becoming composers. So that line is blurring in a
Hmm.
really, really interesting way.
So you are a composer, you're a musician, and you got into doing scores for films. Is it? I imagine you're sitting down to like compose a song or whatever, and often I know you have something in your head, but to me that feels a little bit like the blank page. Do art. There's so many possibilities. Where do you start? And I imagine that doing something for film could either be kind of liberating in its constraints. You needed a track for this 3 minute and 45 second sequence and it needs to convey this emotion, or maybe it can just be like so constricting that it's less fun.
Yeah, no, they're very different of how they operate for me at least because when I'm usually writing a screenplay or thinking about a film from the point of view of music, it's much more fluid. I'm really kind of just thinking of larger, maybe musical themes and types of emotion. So it's this broader
Hmm.
spectrum of how I'm thinking about music as it relates to a scene or a character. But then on the flip side, when it is already a made scene, and one is trying to accomplish something musically for that when I'm composing for a scene. It's almost a bit more like highly analytical. The emotions meet the expectations of the filmmaker, but then beyond that, it becomes very technical.
So what's the process like then? Creating a pop song, for example, there's often sort of pretty standard formulas, the chorus a couple of times, the bridge back to the chorus, whatever it is. But, you watch a film and there's an emotional track and then it sort of begins to soar the moment the spaceship is taking off. How do you make the thing coherent as a piece of music, but also hit those beats so that at the exact moment you need the sort of soaring strings, the strings are soaring.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, everyone's process is different, but it's kind of like writing in a way, and it's often the same thing in filmmaking.
I saw a like bonus feature of Andor with Tony Gilroy about the last episodes of the second season, and it's not really a spoiler. It kind of ends right before the movie Rogue One begins, and he was talking about they kind of knew then what the last shot was. They had to, and he started talking about it, and it was set up like he was going to start talking about how challenging it was to sort of fit everything into that. And he was like, that was such a gift. It was so liberating knowing where it has to end made everything else actually a lot easier. I wonder if there's sort of a similar thing, like that the strings have to soar at minute 240, so back into a track now.
Yeah, yeah, it does definitely make it easier. And that's like going back to these artists that aren't formally trained from film composition. I wonder if that's the appeal from the director side of like their instincts are going to be coming in a way that don't really meet the expectations of just film composition, but it's much more, writing music in the way in which they do. And so they'll approach it that way. And I bet you that unique friction creates this sort of different combustible way of how you compose
Yeah.
something. Like I'm so curious to talk to Paul Banks who scored Sister Midnight, or now I think it's an individual from Dirty Projectors who scored The Legend of Ochi. Sun Locks, they scored Everything Everywhere All at Once. And in my opinion, they're a lot of my favorite film scores of the last few years, including obviously Trent Reznor. Now I think he's primarily a composer. It's interesting how that's switched now.
Yeah. I wonder if some aspect of it is also being able to control a little bit if someone's coming in and they're not from a background of scoring music. Then, so I remember my first screenwriting gig was being supervised. It was basically the first time I had written for screen, and I was being supervised by someone who had a lot of experience as a director and would say things like, "No, I want you because you have real journalism experience." And I, of course, totally ignored that and tried to be a screenwriter in exactly the wrong way. And every scene was like, and then like the movie Roma, there's a long tracking scene. No, 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 no. Don't tell me what other movies it's like.
Talent in the music world, or in your case in the world of journalism, like that is a lot of your bread and butter of where you started, and then your point of view into film is going to be slightly different from someone who's just trained as a screenwriter. I mean, I think that's why you and I we get along so well, because perhaps we're coming in from a different vantage point, and at least to me that always creates something much more worthwhile and feels it was kind of made holistically. I was reading an interview with the director of Sister Midnight, and he likened working with Paul Banks, the lead of Interpol, to working with a non-actor who primarily
Mm.
are in Sister Midnight. It's very much that same sort of, approaching, as he said, approaching the film with some naivete. And I think
Mm.
that's quite interesting because you're getting a very fresh perspective from actors or artists in the music world. Now, obviously, I don't know if you could do it with certain other trades, like let's say cinematography. Would you want simply a photographer to kind of take over a role like that? Potentially, I don't know, but I think there's probably a higher chance of risk there. But overall, I mean, I think it's always exciting when when filmmakers take a chance on whether it's on an acting side, music side, or in various other areas and bring them into the fold, because then it's like you're opening it up so it doesn't feel like just any other
Well, yeah, but I
formulaic
mean,
film.
making a film, especially as a director, I think, right? You are sort of the captain of a ship. You need a direction. You need people bought into a vision. You need to have a vision. And the line between being so controlling that you strangle all creativity on the one hand, and on the other hand, being so open that you just end up with a pile of mush is, I think that's a really thin line. And
It
you're,
is. Yeah, no, I love this trend, and I only hope it continues. It seems like it will, because look, if there's a festival of now up and coming composers where people, go watch it, like Coachella, that's amazing. That's so cool, you know? I think it just shows that there's a growing interest of this sort of new wave of film music that's really kind of coming in from a lot of the independent music world.
I think a cool contest would be to have a composer, like one of these musicians, do a film score first and then have a director try to make a film to match it. One other personal question about your own experience. I sometimes think when there's like actor directors, like, is it awkward when they're being directed by someone else? I can do that. Why am I listening to you? So for you, as a director, but also composer, there ever like um, come on, let me do this.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think sometimes there's a feeling of that, like at times that, but I really try to restrain that, because, I know I'm not like being hired to give notes on an edit. Like, there's no, like, no, everyone's gonna tell me to shut up pretty quickly. But then when I'm directing, at least, I honestly don't approach it like where I think I'm going to be making the music for it. I genuinely don't think that that's the case. But then eventually, I usually start playing a piece of music that I was like not really thinking about for the movie, but I start sensing it's kind of fusing together naturally. So therefore, I'm like, okay, how about this sort of informs the way that we approach the scenes? It's helpful for me to direct it then too. So they kind of start leaning on each other in this organic way. Then I start to fall in love with how they're working together.
In general, in composing for film or just, fooling around, do you take, like, I keep seeing that, I think it's like Instagram video of Phineas, I think, and Billie Eilish, and him
Yeah.
talking about a crosswalk, like beeping sound for blind people that they heard in Australia or South Africa or something and loved it. And then, like, that's the beginning of the song. Like, how often you go
That's
out and hear a
amazing.
bird and are like, ooh, I'm going to use that note, like,
There's a good amount of that, and I just always will record on my phone. But, that's probably like 90% of that I will usually never use, but it's kind of like by habit now. I'm like, "Oh, that's so interesting." Oh, that, you just kind of, it's like photography, but in the like a sonic form. But what about for you in the world of writing? How do you index a really, really interesting sort of sentence that you want to use in your book, but like inspiration struck while you were
yeah,
walking around in Vietnam or on a plane or
right.
something? Yeah, how do you kind of pull that all together?
So Carl McCann, who's a brilliant novelist, Let the Great World Spin, and a bunch of others, he always talks about how he wants to be a writer when he's writing and not be someone who's sort of a slave to it the rest of the day. So he tries not to do any of that. Now he's a novelist, right? It's not nonfiction, so he doesn't have to like take notes to be able to find them. That is the dream. I don't feel like I am a natural war correspondent or narrative journalist. It's every single story. It's sort of inventing a new protocol. I remember for The Last Thousand, which was nonfiction but was sort of mounted like a novel, but I was in Afghanistan in the community trying to kind of take notes about what was happening for without knowing what was going to happen, without knowing where the
Hmm.
where the book was going, right? So I felt like I sort of had to record everything. And I likened it to documentary work where, you have a bunch of cameras following a community around and then you sort of find it in the edit. 'Cause that's sort of what I was doing. So to do that, I would take notes on a little BlackBerry all day. They'd be totally mistyped and sometimes I wouldn't even know what I'd say. But then every day I'd go back and I'd sort through them. So the idea being that then I could go back and sort of type one in and see all of the notes that sort of corresponded to that and then begin to see how the story evolved. But then
Oh, that's
also,
brilliant. So you would be tagging it later on in the evening to just know,
yeah,
hey, these are indexed for later. I'm so curious to pick your brain. What was your writing process? How did it evolve from the beginning?
spoiler alert, it's you take the subject of your book and you type it into ChatGPT and say, write a book for me.
I know,
And
isn't
that's it.
that like that's where everything's headed nowadays, right? It just
Yeah.
feel, but look, not to go down that rabbit hole, but I genuinely believe even if that is the case, what will be novel?
I think your attitude has generally been like, okay, how can we use this? Which I think is exactly the right attitude. And I think it's going to add pressure. I think requires even this tool that is often being pitched as sort of to help creators create better is going to make it harder for creators to sort of cut through. You have to be even more exquisite about your wording in order to sort of,
Yeah, because there's going to be just so the volume. I think it's just like the war of just pure volume of material will
mhm,
just make it harder for a lot of people to cut through who
the creative deflation, right?
creative deflation, a great term, a great phrase that you came up with. I think that's fantastic, honestly. But yeah, it's a complex
Right.
landscape for
Will it be
sure.
like organic food, where will it be like there'll be a tag, made by humans? Creators and artists like have to really value what they do more for the intrinsic value, which I often have been, then you're sort of set up to fail. And if you're doing something and you're getting some meaning out of the process, then whatever happens in terms of its reception is a little bit of a bonus.
That's absolutely right and much more vital now for sure. Just to kind of transition, just I want to say I want to plug Sister Midnight again. I think it's a fantastic film that's out in theaters and select cinemas now. Watch it for a fantastic comedy drama, but then very unexpected music by Paul Banks too. Um, but yeah, should we?
Okay, so Amman and I recently returned from Scotland, where Yasmin's Element premiered at Sands International Film Festival, which is an amazing festival. Shout out to Anya, who's the world's greatest festival director and
Amazing.
supporter of the arts. But it happened to be at St. Andrews, which turns out is the birthplace of golf and kind of the golf mecca. So I don't think either of us are the biggest golf aficionados, but it must have been in that mindset because shortly after returning, I started seeing advertisements and news about the new Owen Wilson show, which I think is called Stick, which is, sort of supposed to be kind of a Ted Lasso for golf. And then there's news about a new Happy Gilmore, and there's at least one or two other golf themed like entertainment products in the pipeline, and began to think about how it may not be a coincidence. There was the Netflix show Full Swing, which was their kind of doc series about golf that I think got a lot of people who previously were not interested in golf in a similar way to how Drive to Survive, which was the doc series that came out about Formula One racing. And I don't know about you, but like all of a sudden I had friends who claimed to be fans of Formula One racing when no one had ever
Right.
watched a Formula One race that I know of. A little before the Saudi-backed Live Golf Tour started, which I think part of the pitch was somewhat ironically a kind of more egalitarian approach to what, of course, has always been kind of an elitist sport. The Live tournaments were in a format that was more approachable, that they were like more fun. People were playing music. It was sort of more of a party vibe. And began thinking about how some companies and industries, and for example, entertainment, one of the moves when it begins to seem like domestic subscriber growth is limited and like that limit is being reached is to look overseas and try to, Netflix beginning to invest more in foreign productions and buying more foreign IP and more Korean shows. But it seems like what's going on with golf is like instead they're trying to penetrate socioeconomic statuses in America that have previously not been people who pay to go play golf or to buy golf clubs or whatever. And I have a friend who started just kind of on a whim to promote his beer company. Shout out to Dan Hirschberg, started this sort of like softball beer league for golf. So he and some of his friends could play golf and it would promote his beer brand. And it took off and it became the thing that is now his main job because it's sort of so popular. Um, and he's talking about these golf brands who have been interested in participating and funding it and buying it because there is this initiative to sort of to grow the game. There's only so many rich people at country clubs you can sell golf clubs to, but if you can, get more people involved, more people interested, then you can, sell your wares to a bigger population of people. And there's Top Golf, which is taking off, which is a driving range slash bar.
Even last week, my family in Little Rock went to Top Golf for the first time, and that's just like so random, out of
Your mom
nowhere.
got the bug.
She's probably got the bug. She
Ma
was,
Abbasi, who played mini golf for the first time at St. Andrews, like the
that's
spoiled
right.
brat that she is, and on her first putt, sunk a hole in one.
Yeah, so she's a big golfer now. No, but sorry, yeah, you're saying that there's this clearly this global trend that's moving towards finding new audiences for golf. And is the question there, is it sort of a planned effort or is it an organic growth that's just kind of slowly
Right.
sweeping?
Is there some McKinsey consultant who's going to Formula One and to golf and to other sports and saying, okay, you know what you need to get a bigger audience is a Netflix doc series, show, a movie.
So what's your instinct? Do you feel as though it's a bit more strategic than organic?
Yeah, I'm conspiratorial. I think like George Soros is behind it or something.
He has he has he has everything to gain by that. I think you're right though. Like now thinking since you brought it up, I have noticed my own interaction with golf come up more and more, not by my own interest, but it's just like coming into our spheres a little closer. That's
Hmm.
interesting. Yeah, is it to like sell more golf clubs? Like what is it? What's the end game? If it is strategic, what do you think? Who's the
Well, if it
winner?
is strategic, like, Callaway is a golf company. I don't know that like this one company has the resources to push, Owen Wilson to do a golf show or something, but a brand like that is trying to expand its market. And I imagine the market of potential customers is fairly limited by how it's traditionally been such an elite and accessible sport that it would certainly be in their interest. So is it a trade group? Is it the Golf Equipment Sellers of America who are hiring George Soros? Is there like a McKinsey, Bain Capital
Consultant.
kind of consultant but yeah, so, or is it just organic? Is it just a thing in the ether? But it seems to me like such a similar playbook to F1. And of course, now, like one of the big tentpole summer blockbusters is a Formula One movie.
Called F1 and
Mm-hmm.
it has a massive footprint. Yeah, I that's interesting too because my partner, she's a big fan of, is it called Drive to Survive? The Netflix
Mm-hmm.
show? Yeah, and I started watching an episode two and I saw the appeal of it right away and I'd heard of going to F1, a lot of individuals going there. And so yeah, it starts kind of orbiting us pretty closely after that. And so golf is right around the corner. Who's going to be the big golf star in the
Right.
big golf
Well, also,
blockbuster?
so then two other questions. One is, what's the next sport or trend? Is there going to be a Magic
Ooh,
the
I
Gathering
like this.
doc series?
Wait, what is it? Is that a card game?
It's a card game, yeah, that cool kids played in middle school.
I feel like it's
Maybe,
gonna be
yeah,
something like pickleball or
like
something.
oh, you're probably right. It's gonna be pickleball. It's gonna be or like bocce.
Yes, that's interesting. So you're spotting this trend that's potentially strategic in golf coming more mainstream. And as a writer and one who's worked in film, what would be your golf movie or show if you had one?
Mm,
Like if there's a time to do a golf thing, this seems to be the time.
I think it would be a really gritty, grounded, dramatic retelling of Shakespeare's Othello on a mini golf course,
That's
where
honestly
the
amazing.
That's tricky. I'll get to one of the other sort of tensions, I think, in this industry and maybe all creative industries, which is, at least like from a bit of a journalism background, I think you have the sensibility to, like there's this saying in journalism to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. One of the things my agent said once that I thought was like the biggest compliment is like, you never want to write about John F. Kennedy. You want to do that like famous old op-ed that someone wrote about the gravedigger who dug his grave. Like that has always been what's fascinated me, like the people sort of just off scene or either rendering an extraordinary person like as ordinary or someone superficially ordinary, sort of showing the extraordinary. Full Swing, which I didn't watch most of, but watched a little bit of. And there's a player who I don't think was very popular, was not like a household name, but he kind of a guy with like a great personality, he seemed really fun, kind of drank a little too much. And he kind of was catapulted to prominence by the first season. And in the second season, you see him kind of struggling with that, like struggling with how to deal with the fame that the first season made. And I thought that was kind of an interesting, not that any of these things are really holding to documentary standards necessarily, but that fact seems sort of like in some way kind of violating one of the first rules of documentary, which is not influencing the outcome.
Right.
But if you do, to at least sort of show the instrument. So I sort of have some ambivalence on whether that was a really cool thing for them to do, to show it and to not cut out in the edit that like it was this documentary that gave me these problems, or whether just the fact that the documentary had that effect is sort of, indictment.
Right. That's really interesting because, I wonder how, like, you could ask the same question about that Drive to Survive show in the case of F1, how much of it was just really a way to gain interest for the sport, sell more tickets, even though it's a really compelling show and it has a really great end. It's hard to determine if it's made by the merit of just,
Hmm.
hey,
Right.
these are interesting characters and we want to follow them. It's clearly, it may very well have some interest from the F1 folks too. um it's a really interesting, like, kind of like, it's kind of blurry to know what the ethics of something like that is.
Yeah. Oh,
It's hard to it's hard to know in the world of, like, let's say the show Drive to Survive, what would they do in the case of where they know, or I don't know, I'm assuming here, but if F1 actually has a stake or some influence on the way that it's made,
mm,
it's probably good for the viewer to know, even
exactly.
if it's
Yeah.
still as good as it is, just so you're
Totally.
aware that you're being influenced.
In doc that a lot of docs, now are about famous people or they're music docs. And that's
Hmm.
fine and great. But a lot of them, the musician, the subject is a producer. And
Right.
that's not often volunteered. And not that it's like denied, but I do think that if you're calling it a doc, then at the beginning and the artist is a producer and has some influence, then it should say in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree because it's such a blurred line now. I'm so glad that documentary as a format has really exploded. I think it's amazing for the form that, all these great documentarians are making fantastic films. But in that, there's a lot of these sort of more or less like puff pieces,
Hmm.
whether it's for a company or if it's for an individual, and it's less of a documentary. And it'd be nice to be able to quickly determine,
Right.
what you're watching. Even if it has really, really good intentions, it still needs to be disclosed if there's
Right.
a party that's kind of influencing it.
Wait, there's all these rules in journalism, like, you can't spend money on a subject. You can't take money from a subject. And
Hmm.
that the first one really can get really tricky, especially for me. I'm often in places where people are in some kind of extremists and I'm asking them to like take their time and share their traumas and stuff. And I'm not really supposed to like, buy them a drink or something. We sort of contort ourselves in order to sort of maintain authenticity. And so then it feels a little salty when you sort of see, bunch of people making a bunch of money making a puff piece and not
I
even
agree. I
saying produced
completely
by.
agree. And I feel like it's a growing trend of people skirting away from journalistic integrity in that way, just
Mm,
because there's just so much material out there. You can sort of just weave through it and hope something else takes the headlines and you kind of go under the radar. And it seems like the more people do it, the more reasons to it's excusable. I don't know what will come of it,
and
but
it's not
that
it's
it
not to
kind of
say.
comes full circle to your, or I should say, full swing to your golf, theory. Where is it just organic, or is it being influenced from larger corporations or individuals that have an actual maybe financial interest
Right,
of
right.
sorts?
And it's not to say don't do promotion. And I was thinking about, do you remember BMW films? Like the early
No.
2000s, there's a series of films that BMW put out, short films where I think Clive Owen's in all of them, and he's
Yes,
this
I do. I
driver.
do. I remember seeing these. Yes.
I thought they were so cool, and I thought they were like really well made and entertaining, and um, they were BMW films. BMW in it is awesome and doing cool shit. So that's great. That's fine. It's not saying this is a documentary about BMWs that BMW had nothing to do about. It's sort of like this is promotion, but it's art too. It's just all it takes is acknowledging that it's promotion.
That's right. And by virtue of that, it actually could build a higher value for the brand.
Hmm.
Is the golf brand Callaway, you said?
Hmm.
Okay, to use your same example of BMW films, it could actually be more interesting if Callaway said a Callaway series, and it's this really cool series with Owen Wilson and all these other individuals that could actually build a higher value for the
Yeah,
brand eventually too.
I met a guy. I was telling you about it. Met a guy a couple of nights ago. and I'm going to bastardize the story, but he is sort of a tech guy and a political activist. And I think he had some tension in his family, and his father is the third or fourth generation owner of a storied watch company. And this guy that I met sort of recently it sounded like he almost as a way to sort of reconnect with his father, agreed to begin working for the family business, sort of take this on as the fourth generation or fifth generation or whatever it is. And their thing is Hampton watches. And no, we are not endorsed by Hampton watches, although open to inquiries. Their whole thing is every watch tells time, ours tells a story. And there's videos on their website of these brothers who had the same inscription on a watch, and it brought them together, and it's done really well. I found it kind of touching. And of course, it's on their website right next to a buy now button. Like, it's promotion, it's a commercial, but it's really well done and thoughtful and sensitive and feels genuine. They're sort of saying, yeah, we promoted this, we made this, but it's also really special. And we're going to admit to you that it's kind of a commercial. We're not trying to fool you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I feel like it can be both. And, in the best circumstances, it is both. All right. Well, I'm going to keep my eye on golf coming in the culture more and more. I'm going to see where this thing lands. Maybe it's right. Maybe next summer, we're going to be talking about some big golf movie that's taking over.
Maybe it's going to be ours.
All right. All right. I think this wraps up episode 2.
Episode 2 in the bank.
In the bank.
Questions, comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Email them all to Amman's personal email or text them to him, and he will respond to each one personally.
Exactly. All right, Jeff. Until next time, and hopefully we'll be doing a deep dive on the writing process of Jeff's
All right.
upcoming book on maybe next week's episode.
Be sure to tune in for that. Can't be missed.